game as Linux builds some momentum. I'd love to get your take on two issues, the open versus closed argument on mobile platforms, as well as is there still room for a variety of open source mobile operating systems?
So I think to the point for the argument between open versus closed or proprietary code delivery models, that argument really centers on one focal concern, and that's the concern of control. To what extent does the individual, the organization, or a company feel that they need to exert control over that asset? And clearly when companies make an investment, they're looking for some return on that investment. I'd say the concerns really focus in three areas. That is legal, financial, and the third is a strategic concern. And I'll touch on the last one first. That the strategic concern really centers around the ability for a company to leverage their source code as an asset and using that to set pace in a market and maintain that pace through technological innovation. So the question being, at what point does a company or organization give up their code when they want to effectively seek parity, or they want to turn to a broader community of developers to further innovate on top of that deliverable? I don't want to get into the middle of that debate because it's a philosophical debate that's been waged for the better part of the last 10 years, evolving originally also from the PC space, given that Linux came on the market over a decade ago. I think to the question, though, there clearly are pros and cons for both models, and I'd say that they fall on a spectrum or an axis of contention that ranges from utopia at one end and reality at the other end, and the perspective differs depending on who's making the argument. So, for example, in for the open source claims, you have some who are on the far right of that argument that feel that they want all software to be effectively open source. And while that's all good and well, the problem, though, the reality is that a lot of companies are trying to generate revenues from that, and they are trying to use that as strategic positioning, and they've got to pay real employees, real salaries, and real benefits, and they have to figure out how they're going to monetize that. And it's not so easy, in some cases, to try and cook up new business models in order to generate that revenue. On the flip side, though, there are real benefits to open source, in that you can, of course, immediately increase the number of eyeballs that are reviewing the code, and then you can tap into the experiences of domain experts who might look at particular aspects of the code and offer new improvements through their solutions back into the main code line. So clearly there are pros and cons to both approaches, and we see that moving forward, there are going to be some companies, and particularly smaller companies at that have to move and be nimble with respect to movements in their market, that they may prefer a closed model or proprietary approach for some time, and then over time they may evolve to turn to an open source model. And we're certainly delighted that Symbian OS will be made open source next year, assuming that we get past the regulatory approval with Nokia's acquisition of our company. I want to touch on one point, though, that I think that you made in that as well, and this is the issue of Linux. I think that, given my background coming up the engineering track and having worked for Motorola, conducted technical due diligence on operating systems, there's been a lot of misleading information over the years that have been presented to the market around the fitness of Linux for the mobile space. And it really comes down to an issue today of license versus labor. You will license a solution that is a mature solution that has been brought to market, such as Symbian OS has now evolved over the years, or you will go out and invest in the labor, which is a non-trivial investment to try and bring Linux to fitness at a level that you can ship a commercial device. And when you drill down and you really look at the heart of Linux, what you identify is that there's been fantastic work, wonderful work that's been done in the Linux community for network workstations in the PC space. But when you drag that over now into the mobile space, it's an entirely different domain with a different set of challenges that the handset manufacturers have to overcome, and particularly with considerations of the resource constraints that you deal with on a mobile device. Constrained CPU computational capability, resources in memory management, and power management in particular. And when you drill down and you look at Linux and identify what is Linux really, it's just a kernel. And when you start to move beyond Linux, you start to quickly gravitate towards a proprietary implementation. As you add an underlying device driver model that becomes hard real-time, or hard real-time extensions to drive a radio, and at the upper layer, you start to add an application execution environment. And then, in fact, when you add all these components together and you move from some proprietary direction, when you go and ask all of the Linux solution providers what percentage of software runs across all of their platforms, in fact, the answer is near 0%, because there's such a degree of high fragmentation in that space. And I think that it's high time that we set the record straight, and I wanted to start with this event.
So real quick, Morgan, can you do a response in 10 seconds for that before we need to move on? How about 20?
Well, just two quick points. On the open versus closed question, I think it became abundantly clear 2 years ago that through the lack of take-up of the mobile internet among mass consumers, that closed technology was serving the mobile industry very badly. And it was based upon that crisis within the industry, that leading parties within the industry came together to form the mobilization in order to start opening technology. The engagement with that proposition has been very rapid, as I mentioned. All of the tier 1 operators are now on board and are behind it, and the entire community is blossoming very quickly. On the other point, the question of whether Linux is suitable for mobile phones, I think that's an old question which was answered probably 4 or 5 years ago. We've launched 23